I've got to tell you, after all these years, it is just so satisfying to have a brand new Crash Bandicoot game. Let's complain about it. Let's make one thing clear. Crash 4 is fantastic. It's an authentic experience that successfully expands on the gameplay set up by the original trilogy. Almost all of the levels are fun to play and gorgeous to look at, on top of being brutally difficult. And we have 3 extra playable characters who all feel nicely distinct and fun to play. A lot of us had given up on playing a new Crash game at all, so I would like to personally thank the Toys for Bob crew for giving it to us. Put simply, the game is awesome. The story could be a little better though. The plot is pretty simple. Cortex and his menagerie of mad scientists return after being trapped at the dawn of time at the end of Warped. This awakens the Quantum Masks, who enlist Crash and friends in tracking each other down so that they can close up the holes in time they're creating. It's a simple setup for them to go completely wild with, and they kinda don't. Now, I do realize that Crash Bandicoot isn't where most people come for a detailed plot, and compared to the Naughty Dog days, or even Wrath of Cortex, the storyline and how it's laid out is a massive step up. Essentially, you get a full cutscene instead of a warp room head. The problem is that Crash Twinsanity exists. It was the first game in the series to have a fully fleshed out storyline, and the last quote-unquote true full Crash game until this one. They also both have very different approaches to storytelling, so I'm going to be comparing them a lot, and I want to apologize for that now. See, it's not a case where I hate the plot itself or anything that specifically happens in it. Quite the opposite, actually. It's About Time is full of fun ideas that I like, but seems to have a really hard time using them properly. To name a few examples. The story revolves around cracks in the multiverse, hence the presence of Action Torna. With the post-Naughty Dog games being made non-canon, this could be a fun way to reintroduce any character from the franchise without much build-up or context. But they don't do that. As a silent protagonist, Crash has limited interaction with surrounding characters. In one of their few good ideas, the Radical Entertainment games essentially had Aku Aku talk for him in cutscenes. As they were trying to do more with her, however, that role could have gone to Coco for this game. But they don't do that. The second full world ends with a mini-boss battle against a local swamp monster, suggesting that each or at least some of the worlds not controlled by a familiar villain may also end in such an encounter. But they don't do that. In order not to break the flow of gameplay with cutscenes, bosses could directly participate in the levels themselves, adding to the spectacle and satisfaction when you finally beat them directly. But they don't do that. Except when they do. Based off his dialogue, Brio is so desperate and lonely, he actually sees Crash and Coco as his only friends. This could be used for some very strange and memorable interactions, or even have him want to team up with them again like they did in the second game until Crash accidentally pisses him off. But they don't do that. Also, why is Brio working for Cortex again? That is kind of a big deal to his character. There is more, but I can't really fault the game for just not doing something. I mean, they could have made all the crates purple. That's not a complaint, it's a statement. In this case though, it feels like I'm being deliberately teased at some points. Like, why even include something like the flashback tapes? It's a very creative take on bonus levels, which is appreciated, but now that you've put that idea in my mind, I'm quite curious about Crash's past, and I'm sorry, but a obstacle course narrated by Cortex is not going to sate that. I didn't think there was anything more to the origin story. You opened that door and slammed it shut again. Not that I want some epic prequel story. I don't want to see Aku Aku gazing sadly at the destroyed world he was sworn to protect. I want jokes about Coco not getting any cell phone reception because her network hasn't been invented yet. That's the Twinsanity approach. There, every segment led into each other, which basically made the whole game one ridiculous set piece after another, which in turn led to lots and lots of little memorable moments.
Well, the past few years have kind of been slow. Wrath of Cortex didn't do as well as we'd hoped, and... Fish?
This game never really slows down to have fun like that, more interested in, well, letting you play it. The levels are just very good Crash levels without a whole lot more context. Which is totally fine, it's a different game, 16 years apart, it's just, there's a few brief points where I'd forget that the Quantum Masks could talk. I'd forget Aku Aku could talk. I forgot that Coco could talk. What a respectful young lady, she just stands there and lets them do their bit. How polite. Now, as for how the other playable characters fit into this, that's where they actually do drop the ball. See, I like playing as Torna. Her introduction is actually my favourite level in the entire game, but once they're introduced, with one exception, she, Dingodile and Cortex are only playable in timeline levels. In these, you get to play half a new level as Torna, where she causes some incredibly minor and unnecessary part of a previous level to happen, and then you're back to that level as Crash, except now it's slightly harder. Okay, I clicked on the level with Torna's face on it because I wanted to play as her. Was that not obvious? On that note, Dingodile has absolutely no role in this story that couldn't be removed without consequence. Dingodile is my favourite character. I don't think I should be questioning why they invited him. You could argue that this works as a test, keeping it limited in case people didn't like the new playstyles. The problem is that I did, and they end up feeling tacked on. Twinsanity had a similar problem with the Cortex and Nina segments, though that was more because the game was half finished, and they managed to bring that around by using the extra characters in the final boss, giving those segments a little more payoff. Not so much here. Don't get me wrong, Twinsanity had twice as much wasted potential and is well aware of it. It's one of the most frustrating things you can see in a good game, and that's really my entire problem here. I think I'm just gonna go ahead and spoil the final boss as my final example here. Just stop the video if that's not what you want. Cortex goes back in time to stop himself from creating Crash. Realizing he can't just kill his past self, he concludes that his only option is to kill Crash and Coco from the present, meaning he's just doing the exact same thing as before, but he's in the past now. Then he steals the quantum masks to use for himself. What could have been his finest hour amounts to this.
Yoink.
And so you beat him, setting the future exactly as it was with no differences, meaning that any time travel in this last segment was entirely superfluous. I'll be honest, I was really expecting something to go wrong that would set up like a splitting timeline that would explain the events of Wrath of Cortex and Crash of the Titans. But I actually don't like that kind of multiverse bullcrap, so this one I'm okay with. Now, with all that in mind and out of the way, here's my conclusion. I hope you disagree with me. I hate that this bothers me so much, and I hope there comes a time when I cringe at this video and realize it's an even bigger pile of nitpicks than I do now. I think it's good that the Crash Bandicoot fanbase is active enough to have people like me critical of the story, but I want people to enjoy It's About Time. And God help me, this crap was always in the back of my head through the entire game. Way back when, I actually had a similar reaction to Crash Twinsanity, which, if you can't tell, has gone on to become my favourite Crash game of all. So I look forward to replaying this one in about a year when my brain has just accepted everything and I can just sit back and enjoy the many things that this game does well. I want this game to be successful and for Crash to stick around for a dozen new games to come. I want to see this resurgence keep going. But if this were to be the last game in the entire series, I would say we're ending on a high note. If it isn't obvious enough already, buy Crash Bandicoot 4! You will probably enjoy it. And if you already have, please let me know why I am totally wrong about the story in the comments. Like, really, convince me. I don't want to feel this way. Oh yep, I have a Patreon, whatever.